Hey guys, I thought I'll do another video on the next session. So the next session is kind of interesting. What we're going to do is we're going to take a big monolithic Node.js application. Then we're going to containerize it and then deploy it to the cloud. And then also we're going to break this monolithic application into microservices. And I think the cool part is we can do all this without any kind of downtime. So the link is here. I'll also post it in the group as well. So this kind of goes through all the steps involved. Now, the first thing you need to do, let me see here. You want to have an AWS account. So hopefully everyone has an AWS account. Then you need to install Docker on your machine. So the install for Docker is fairly simple. You can install it on Windows, or if you have a Mac, you can install it on a Mac as well. Um, I also use the AWS command line interface. There's a little bit of setting up to do. You need to get your access key ID and a secret access key, and then you can run some command lines, some commands against the AWS. So instead of using the UI, you can use the command line interface as well. Another requirement is you don't really need Visual Studio Code. Any kind of text editor will do. Sublime is pretty good as well. I used Visual Studio Code here for myself. Now, so there is this project that you can download from GitHub. So once you download this project and you unzip it, you will see that there are 3 projects inside of it. So I've unzipped the project from GitHub. So you see there is one project number 1, no container. Project number 2 is containerized. So this is our big monolithic application. And project number 3 is it breaks down this containerized application into 3 smaller components. So let's start with the no container. So this is just a plain vanilla Node.js application. So you go in, you see your server.js. So I've opened that project here in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going into project number 1. This one has, no, it's just a plain vanilla Node.js application. So you can go to your server.js. This has your Node.js code. You see here there is a db.json file. So this provides kind of the data source for your application. So what I did was I went into this db.json file and I added this extra snippet of data. So this tells me that I'm running locally. So I added this in project 1 db.json file. So this gives me an indication that this is running locally. So to run this, I can I can run it from my command line. So cd, I would have to go into project 1. And I'm inside project 1, node, oops. So right now the project is running. Just to make sure that the project is running, I can go here and I can, so it's listening on port 3000. So I run API users and I see that there is Milton, it's running locally. It's not containerized yet. It's just plain vanilla JavaScript. Now, if you look at the data itself, so there is users data, and there's also threads, and there is also posts. So there are 3 components here in this data. And pretty much this server.js file, if you look at the server.js file, it exposes that as kind of a REST service. So I can also go threads and I should get the threads. But it's all one big application and it's not containerized or anything. At this moment, we are just running it locally. So the next step is we want to containerize it. So we go into project number 2. Now, project number 2, if you look at the code, if you go into services and API, and if you go into the node.js code, it's pretty much pretty much the same code. So there's nothing different here. But what we are going to do is, but you see some additional files, docker file. So we are going to use this Docker file to containerize this application. So we're going to create a Docker container. So there is a command that you can use to containerize this application. So that's what we're going to do. So, and also what I did was in this db.json file, I added this new data here. This data that says that I'm running in a big monolithic container. I'm containerized. And again, we're taking the entire application, and we are making one big container of this entire application. Granted, the application itself is like just one file, but still. So it's the entire application, we are going to containerize it. Now, in order to do that, I would have to go into so I'm stopping my node server. So I'm going into project number 2. So this is what we want to containerize it. And the file is under cd services API, cd services/API. And here we have all the files, and the Docker file is more important. So let's have a look at the Docker file. So this tells you how to containerize it. So the first line, it says from mhart alpine node.js. So we are using this as the starting point. So from the Docker Hub, we're going to be downloading this alpine node image version 7.10.1. So we use that as the starting point, and pretty much we're going to copy everything here in this directory, put it in there, and we're going to run npm install, and also we're going to expose port 3000. And once the container starts, we're going to run node server.js so that it listens on port 3000. So let's go ahead and run this command to create a Docker file. Now I have built a few files already, so I'm going to, so first let's build this Docker file. And I am going to also tag this Docker file as version 4. So I've tagged it as version 4. And then I'm going to push this to the AWS Docker registry. So they have a container registry in AWS. So I'm going to push it to this AWS Docker registry. So right now it's pushing it to the Docker registry. Oh, so my token has expired. Give me 1 second. So let me grab my token. So this is when you're using the command line interface, uh, things are a little bit easier, but it does expire. So you want to make sure that your token is not expired. So I can grab this. So you should see something saying login succeeded. So now I can go ahead and push it to my AWS registry. Okay, let's see if it did get pushed up. So if I go into my Amazon repositories under API, let's see if, oh, what the hell happened here? So there is version 4, but it's probably the same because I didn't make any changes, so probably it put it right here. So I have version 4 installed here, which is identical to version 3. Um, and and we're all set to go. So one of the things that we are doing here right now with this version is we're going to do something similar to this. So we have the client that's going to connect to a load balancer. And now this load balancer is going to redirect traffic to this cluster, to this container, which already has all the three components, the users, threads, and posts. So there are two instances running. Load balancer can send traffic to either one of them. But the key thing to note is the container contains all the three components. It's one big container, one big monolithic application. And I've already set it up, so I can just show you quickly how the listener rules are. So this is my load balancer in AWS. And if you look at the rules, at this moment, all requests are being forwarded to this API container. This is the monolithic application. So if I run this here, so API users, it's actually going to hit the AWS container that we just created and deployed. And you can see that it says ID 5 and it's running a monolithic container. Yeah, I'm containerized, running in a big container. Um, so this address no longer is your local host. It's something on the AWS, and we are hitting this big container. Now, the next part of the exercise is to decouple, so to break down this monolithic application into like smaller microservices. So if I go into my project in Visual Studio here, Visual Studio Code here, so the third project, now if you look here under services, and if you look into services, there are actually three services. So they've broken down this um, this container application into three different components, three different microservices. One that gives you posts, one that gives you threads, the other that gives you users. Now here again in the users, I went into the db.json file, and notice that the file only has now users data. It doesn't have all of the data. So if you go into the threads db.json, this has the data for the threads. And then if you go into posts, that has the data for posts. So here in the users db.json, I added this new data, new snippet of data that says that I'm running in a microservice container. Now the idea now is you're going to have three Docker images, so you'll have to get three Docker images, and then you'll have to push them to the AWS registry. So I have already done that. So if I go into my ECS, if I go into my repositories, you will see now that I have, in addition, this is the monolithic application API. But now I've pushed three different microservices: the posts, the threads, the users. So when I hit this container, this microservice container, I get data for users, posts, and threads. So these are the three microservices here. So now what I need to do is, so our architecture diagram is like this. So we want to get to this state, so where the client makes a request to the load balancer, and based on what the request is, now that we have broken it into three separate containers, so if it is API/users, then it redirects, it forwards the traffic to the users container. If it is API threads, then it forwards the data to the threads container, API posts to the post container. So no longer is it just forwarding data to one big container. Now we are forwarding data to three different containers. So in my load balancer, I can go ahead and set the rules. So I will go here into this load balancer, and I will add these rules so that now the traffic is forwarded based on the path. So if the path is API users, then I would want to go into forward that to users. I will save it, and I will insert another rule that says if the path is API/threads, then I do want to go to threads. So these are separate containers now. And I will insert another rule that says if I want to, oops, not the host. Then I do want to go to posts. So now what we've done here is we've changed the load balancer rule so that it goes to these individual containers, microservice containers, instead of this monolithic application. And we can also retire this. We'll come to that later, but let's make sure that it's working for now. So if I go into API users, yeah, sure enough, it says now that I'm running in a microservice container because it's now using the users container. So this is good. And here, if I can also go into threads. Again, this is we didn't put any data here, but if we had put some data to identify, it's no longer hitting the monolithic application, but it's hitting the microservice container. And then for me to retire this, I can edit this last thing because we want to retire this monolithic application, and I can go ahead and instead of forwarding it to API, I can forward it to I have a target called drop traffic. So it kind of pretty much drops the traffic. Okay, so now the monolithic application is no longer in the load balancer listener. So it's no longer going to forward to no matter what, it's no longer going to forward to the monolithic application. The monolithic service is still running, so I can still go here, and you can see that in my clusters, the service is still running. The API is still running, it's still active. So you can keep it around for a little while longer. And then once you know that these three microservices are doing the job correctly, then you can delete it. And I believe the way you delete it is, so right now you can update it, and you want to change the number of tasks, you want to change it to 0, and then you can delete it. So once you delete it, now you're fully into the microservices containers. Okay, that's it for now. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks. Bye.